Hi, I'm Peter Doshi, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. For identification purposes, I'm on the faculty of the University of Maryland and an editor at the BMJ. Let's discuss safety. When discussions about a third dose began in July, CDC Deputy Director Dr. Jay Butler said it was vital to find out if the third dose increased adverse reactions, particularly severe ones. Unfortunately, we're still in the dark. Pfizer's booster application reports on just 329 people with no control data. Now, there is a Pfizer ongoing placebo-controlled randomized trial of boosters in 10,000 people not discussed in the briefing document, but this trial is unlikely to satisfactorily characterize booster safety. First, the trial is too small and the enrollment's limited to healthy participants. Second, we really need to know how safe boosters are in people who already had bad reactions to dose 1 or 2. But such people are obviously less likely to volunteer to participate in this trial. So we won't have the data to answer the question. Yet if the booster is approved, such people will surely be mandated to receive a third dose. Final slide D, please. I'll end with a question. Last week, 3 medical licensing boards said that they could revoke doctors' medical licenses for providing COVID vaccine misinformation. I'm worried about the chilling effect here. There are clearly many remaining unknowns, and science is all about probing unknowns. But in the present supercharged climate, and I'll point out that multiple members of this committee are certified by these boards, I want to ask FDA, what is FDA doing to ensure that those advising it are able to speak freely without fear of reprisal? Thank you for your attention.
Speaker is Dr. Paul Alexander.
We are calling for longer-term studies, larger sample size, but longer term, we need the medium and long-term studies to best assess the safety and efficacy, particularly safety, particularly when you're talking about putting these vaccines in our children's arms. We currently do not have the safety data. We absolutely do not. And for anyone at the CDC, anyone at the NIH, and anyone at the FDA to claim so, that is being disingenuous to the public. Now, I wanted to end by saying this. We're extrapolating based on the Japanese data that looked at the lipid nanoparticles and the mRNA that were accumulating in the tissue in the rat model. Yes, it's a rat model, but we have to extrapolate to humans. That showed that the lipid nanoparticle, the constituency of the vaccine, is accumulating in the ovaries, in the testes, in the spleen, in the adrenals, etc. So when somebody like Nicki Minaj, I have to invoke this, makes that statement, that's not a joke. People want to make this a joke and parody it, etc. But this is a very, very serious consideration because we even have animal data that shows us that there's a drop in fertility in the animal model. So we need this properly investigated. The public needs this answer properly.
The next speaker is Dr. Megseymour.
I will focus on the safety sample data discussed in the FDA's briefing document. The total safety sample is very small, only 329 patients. Even more important, the sample is not representative of the people who will want the booster. There are safety data on only 12 patients ages 65 and over, even though people over 65 are considered a priority group for a booster due to weaker immunity. 12 people over 65 is much too small to draw conclusions about safety and is obviously not large enough to have any confidence in the claim that adverse events from booster doses are less common in those 65 and over. Unfortunately, the size of the sample is not the only problem with the safety data. A median of 2.6 months is not enough time for assessing the safety of the booster. In addition, we agree with the FDA that it is unknown whether there will be an increased risk of myocarditis, pericarditis, or other adverse reactions after a booster dose. We all know that COVID can be deadly, but the efficacy of a booster compared to no booster is not well established, since the placebo control group is missing in addition to uncontrolled variables that could influence the diagnosis of COVID for those with boosters and those vaccinated without boosters. Assurance that the benefits outweigh the risks should be gathered before approving booster vaccines. Otherwise, potential risks may become obvious only after large numbers of the general population have received boosters, and the benefits of boosters may be much less than expected. FDA decisions should be based on proof of the safety and effectiveness of a medical product before the product is widely distributed. To approve a booster without adequate safety or efficacy data undermines the integrity of the FDA.
The next speaker is Mr. David Weissman.
Pfizer's booster evidence today is weak. They are small studies in mostly younger subjects. They are short-term. There is no randomized control. There are no clinical outcome data, only serology. Inadequate safety given this is a gene therapy product. Where are the data from the 10,000 patient study? Next slide, F. If FDA cannot assure us of the safety of 2 doses, how can they assure us of 3? We see strong signals for death, myocardial infarction and coagulopathy that need transparent investigation. Next slide, G. We find 3 potential pools of vaccine-associated deaths. Note the second pool among vaccinees. Next slide, H. Daily cases in Israel increase upon booster rollout compared with the same period last year. Please note the correct rollout is July the 1st at the 130 number. The Israel booster presented today has matching censoring bias seen in related studies, non-comparable populations, possible clustering bias, inadequate accounting for early vaccine effects, and a short follow-up in mainly older people. Next slide, I. Others show unexplained Israeli deaths lockstepping with booster rollout. This looks like the second pool deaths we said before in vaccinees rejected by New England Journal of Medicine in February. Next slide, J. Other safety concerns not voiced in the label are revealed in studies funded offline by NIH for menstrual disorders. Next slide, K. And offline by CDC in a disturbing revelation of an urgent need to monitor safety in pregnancy. Put this in the label. Next slide, L. Long-term safety. No cancer studies were performed. Moderna said its vaccine was a gene therapy product. Why is the FDA not requiring 5 to 15-year cancer and other studies per their gene therapy guidance?
The next speaker is Dr. Jessica Rose.
This is a bar plot that shows the past 10 years of VAERS data plotted against the total number of adverse event reports for all vaccines for the years 2011 through 2020 and for COVID-associated products only for 2021. The left bar plot represents all adverse event reports and the right bar plot represents all death adverse event reports. There's an over 1,000% increase in the total number of adverse events for 2021, and we are not done with 2021. This is highly anomalous on both fronts. These increased reporting rates are not due to increased rates in injections and not due to simulated reporting. This has been shown using a comparative analysis of influenza data. The onus is on the public health officials, the FDA, the CDC, and policymakers to answer to these anomalies and acknowledge the clear risk signals emerging from VAERS data.
Dr. Rajesh Gupta.
There is a risk of original antigenic sin phenomena after a booster dose. When antibodies to immunodominant epitopes are made, which get boosted after booster doses with immune memory, vaccination with a new strain or infection with a new strain hijacks the immune system towards the immune response to same epitopes for which antibodies were originally made, leading to no protection against the new strain after disease or vaccination. Next slide. Finally, booster doses leading to high levels of circulating antibodies may generate escape mutants of SARS-CoV-2 virus. So to finally conclude, based on experience with the protection by existing vaccines, booster dose is not justified for general use at this time.
The next speaker is Dr. Joseph Raymond.
I'm here today to ask for help for those working the front line to help us reduce vaccine hesitancy. For this, we need larger trials that demonstrate the vaccine reduced hospitalization without finding evidence of serious harm. I know many think the vaccine hesitants are dumb or just misinformed. That's not at all what I've seen. In fact, typically, independent of education level, the vaccine hesitant I've met in the ER are more familiar with vaccine studies and more aware of their own COVID risk than the vaccinated. Next slide, please. For example, many of my nurses have refused the vaccine, despite having seen COVID-19 cause more death and devastation than most people have. I asked them why refuse the vaccine. They tell me while they've seen the firsthand dangers of COVID in the elderly, the obese, diabetics, they think their risk is low. They're not wrong. Next slide, please. One nurse showed me this Oxford risk calculator. A 30-year-old female has about a 1 in 7,000 chance of catching COVID and being hospitalized over 90 days. She asked me, can I assure her that the studies found her risk of serious harm from the vaccine is lower than her risk of hospitalization? The truth is I can't. Our trials weren't big enough. They weren't big enough to identify the vaccines cause myocarditis, yet now we know they do. Next slide, please. A recent observational study suggests the risk of vaccine-induced myocarditis in young males is higher than their risk of hospitalization from COVID. Is this true? We don't know. It's based on observational data. To know it's not true, we need a large trial that proves the vaccines reduce hospitalization more than they cause myocarditis in this age group. Next slide, please. The former FDA commissioner said the original premise of the vaccine was to reduce death and hospitalizations. And that was the data that came out of the initial clinical trials. Except, as you all know very well, and unfortunately, so did my nurse, the initial clinical trials did not find a reduction in death or hospitalizations, likely because they were inadequately powered. Yet the former commissioner is correct that the initial trials should have been powered to find a reduction in hospitalization. Next slide, please. We need your help on the front lines to stop vaccine hesitancy. Demand the booster trials are large enough to find a reduction in hospitalization. Without this data, we, the medical establishment, cannot confidently call out anti-COVID vaccine activists who publicly claim the vaccines harm more than they save, especially in the young and healthy. The fact that we do not have the clinical evidence to say these activists are wrong should terrify us all. Thank you.